I want to welcome you to the Retro Rogues Live. Please pay attention to our warning graphic. It states that the Retro Rogues Live show is intended for an adult audience and not intended for children under the age of 13. Parental discretion is advised. I want to welcome you to the show. My name is Dave Beatty. I'm one of your hosts. For nearly the last 30 years, I've been a professional illustrator and graphic designer. Worked on a lot of fun things that some people have heard of, and some things people haven't heard of. But I thought I'd talk about my creator-owned stuff here just real quickly. I worked on a lot of creator-owned series I'm very proud of, such as Bushitel, Star Gods, and my current series, Red Skirts. But enough about that. I want to welcome back my co-host. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks hopefully watching or listening at home some of the fun things that you have worked on as a creative professional.
So everyone, I am Eric Alexander, also known as Bass God 14. That's Bass God 14, not Bass God 14. Bass God like a bass guitar. And I am the chief financial officer of a small production company called Bad Bob Productions, located in Arizona. And I'm also the associate producer of a feature film called Occupants, which features Star Trek Voyager actor Robert Picardo, and is currently streaming for free on Tubi.
Very cool. And we didn't talk about this before you started the show, but did you see those makeup test things by any chance?
The makeup test things?
Yeah. Have you not seen those?
I haven't seen them. No, I haven't seen them.
Okay. All right. Well, we have a project we're working on, and I've seen the makeup test, but I don't think Eric has actually seen them yet. But anyhow, maybe we'll talk about that soon. So stay tuned.
Absolutely.
Not this episode, maybe the next episode. We'll see. But again, I want to welcome you here to the show. We're going to start off with our main topic, and I'm going to start. And then right after that, I'm going to segue into an apology here. So our first topic, which is our feature story, our first feature story, is actually going to be the Old Guard. We have our old standby graphic here because I didn't get a chance to put a graphic together for it. Needless to say, I've had a lot of things going on, and I tried to watch the Old Guard. And I literally, I like to describe it as fell asleep, but it's kind of more like passed out, not from drinking, but just from exhaustion. There's just been a lot going on, and I've been working around the clock with stuff, and it's not because the film's bad. I honestly, I didn't see enough of it to honestly have any kind of an opinion. So we thought we would try something different. So now that I've apologized for not having watched it, we're going to do it like we normally do, but I'm going to tell you what I think happened and what I imagine, because I did see part of the movie in my unconscious while I was asleep. So I'm going to kind of give you my general impressions of what my dream state told me the movie actually was, and then we'll actually get Eric's real impressions about what the movie really was about. So again, this is The Old Guard. It's on Netflix. It's basically the synopsis is a covert team of immortal mercenaries are suddenly exposed and must now fight to keep their identity a secret just as an unexpected new member is discovered. Of course, this stars Charlize Theron, Kiki Lane, and a couple other people whose names are too long for me to easily read, including, is that Chiwetel Ejiofor? Wow, okay. I didn't want to see who was in this. It was directed by Gina Prince Blythewood, and of course the writers Greg Rucka. And Greg Rucka, of course, this is based off his comic book series that he created, The Old Guard as well, is my understanding. So let me give you my impression of what I think the movie was like, and then we'll segue over to Eric, who will tell us his real impressions of the movie was really like. So my imaginary dream state, I imagined that I liked it, and I thought it was interesting because it was a crazy mix of like paramilitary stuff and Highlander. So that in my imaginary mind state, that's what I thought was actually happening, and that was the impression I got. And it started with a crazy cool like action sequence that actually started like way back in time, kind of like Highlander, like a flashback sequence, and then segued into what was really going. So that's what my dream state, and my dream state told me that I would like this. So tell me, Eric, what were your real impressions of first impressions or your impressions of the movie?
Well, I have to say, I think it was a good choice that for a retro review, we're doing Highlander because there's tons of comparisons to make between this and Highlander. And then, of course, the ultimate question comes down to who did it better, that kind of thing, right? Or is it should they each be regarded, as something in their own right, But I don't think that there's any denying that there's a derivative nature of this to Highlander. It's not exactly the same premise. The Immortals rules, if you will, are very different. By the way, they don't establish the rules very well in this. That's one thing that kind of annoyed me a little bit, because I think maybe they think that's too obvious these days, and audiences don't like that. I do. I like that because, like in Highlander, they do that. They make sure that we understand the rules, we understand what the goal is, all that kind of stuff. In this one, it's a lot more murky. Now, that is part of the story as well. Part of this story is that they don't really know what their purpose is. They just kind of do it, which is also interesting. That's not necessarily bad. I actually kind of like that. That was kind of interesting to try to figure out exactly, why they're doing what they're doing. But it's very, what's the word I'm trying to look for? It's very polished. It's very clean, which is something that I'm not a huge fan of. I like the sort of more cinematic kind of look to things. I like things that are more sort of that old school. I mean, this is called the Retro Rogues. I like sort of that film aesthetic, as opposed to like that TV aesthetic that is very crisp and clean and seems to be what everybody's doing these days, because they all want to make this stuff for 4K, right? It makes sense. It's all made for 4K television. And now we're getting to 6K, I think. So it keeps going up and up and up. It's going to just look better and better, supposedly, except it doesn't really. Like I said, it looks like TV. It looks like video. And it's shot differently. You can just tell. This is supposed to be, theatrical quality. Netflix is known for that. They make theatrical quality films that are never actually shown in the theater, which is good for them right now because most of the theaters are closed. But it definitely provides an aesthetic that, to me, pales in comparison to the way they used to shoot movies. And again, we're going to be talking about Highlander later. You can just the difference in like the cinematics, the difference in the framing and all that stuff is it's night and day. It's night and day. Absolutely night and day. Completely 100% different. So I guess the big question comes down to about the story. Did I like the story? Well, I thought the story was interesting. It did grab me. I was kind of trying to kind of figure out exactly what was going on. They don't give you a lot of information in terms of again, like why they're doing what they're doing. You just know that they're doing this stuff. It does take a little while to get going. I thought the beginning of it was a little bit, I don't know. I almost felt like what's the purpose of this, because they're not really giving us a lot of information, and the payoff is pretty good for the first I guess, what is it, like 10-15 minutes? We get a kind of a really big reveal, but it definitely takes us a little while to get there, and it's kind of like you're kind of sitting there like, okay, I don't understand exactly what's going on. So that was just my initial impression. I think overall the story, though, does work. To be honest, though, the way it ends, I'm more interested in the next story than I was in what happened in this movie. And anybody who's seen it knows exactly what I'm talking about. The ending sets everything up to where you're like, okay, why wasn't this movie about that?
Well, that's never good when the ending is that, like, I mean, you want the ending to have a payoff, but you normally don't want the payoff to be so great that it's, I mean, because you want people to look forward to the next installment, but you don't want them to feel like, wow, I wish they would have just done that instead.
Yeah,
this is not.
It's very MCU what they did. They went 100% MCU. You know how the MCU used to have these really crazy, end credit endings, these extra scenes and stuff like that, where obviously what they're doing is setting up the next movie. But, like for instance, I could compare it to Avengers. In Avengers, Avengers was just like a thrill ride, and it was just like, this is amazing. Of course, we had all these other movies to introduce the other characters where they really set it up and they took their time. And so, when you finally got the Avengers film and they're all together, you're like, oh my God, this is so awesome. This is great. And then when you kind of get the little tease at the end, and it's not like I knew a whole lot about the Infinity War to begin with, it was still like, oh, this is cool, because I knew enough, that it was like, oh, this is cool. They're setting this up. You know what I mean? They're setting up the real big bad. And they did something similar in the Old Guard, but the problem is you don't have all that context where you're like really feel invested in these characters and all that kind of stuff. Pretty much that's what the movie was. The movie was supposed to kind of get you invested in everybody and figure out what it was. I've said this before. It seems like with a lot of this stuff, we're seeing like the first act of a story instead of actually just seeing a complete story. And that's a huge criticism I have of the way that shows and movies are made today, because they're all made for franchises, right? Everybody wants to have the next franchise. I mean, you can't just make a movie that's just one movie anymore. That apparently is just passé. So you just can't do that. It has to always set up the next thing. And it's like we've really lost something with that, because, again, Highlander is a great example of that wasn't the case at all. In fact, what happened with Highlander was it was a huge bomb, and then it gained a cult following over time. And then they realized, hey, we could actually have some franchise potential over this, but we ended the story. So where are we supposed to go from here? So, of course, they had to change everything in order to do the sequels and everything. They had to change the rules. They had to change the whole premise just so they could do the other movies and the TV series and the cartoon and all the other stuff they did with Highlander. So it kind of grew much more organically, whereas what we're seeing now, it's very manufactured. So it's very clear what they want to do, that they want to go in a certain direction. So you feel a little bit let down. At least I do, because I feel like it's the first act of a three-part, of a standard three-part story. Like we're only seeing the beginning. Like all this stuff that happened, it's like, yeah, it's relevant. It's sort of the classic. Oh, we've got the team together. We know who the players are now, and we also kind of have set up who the villain's going to be in the next one. It's like, so we kind of already know we kind of know what the next movie is going to be about. But that, in a way, very much diminishes what we saw in this movie.
No. Well, there you go. I mean, it sounds to me like you said, it just suffers from that same problem that a lot of these other productions seem to be plagued with. It's interesting because Cobra Kai is coming to Netflix soon, and the first season of Cobra Kai is really great because all it is story and advancing the story. They don't spend a lot of time, sort of stalling out. Go, oh wait, let's save that for later. They just tell a story and they try to make it as fun and entertaining as they can. So that's unfortunate. So that it seems like, and I can tell there how much interest there is in this movie because there are crickets in the chat section.
Well, the movie was doing well, but we've talked about the problem with the Netflix cycle and the problem with reviewing stuff on Netflix. And this is not just us. Some of the biggest names in the biz, if you will, guys like Nerdrotic and Doomcock and people like that, they have problems doing stuff that's on Netflix, and they'll say it's because there's such a short time period where this stuff is relevant to anybody, and then everybody just moves on. You can look in the top 10 of Netflix right now, and the Old Guard's not even there anymore. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy because it had a ton of buzz when it first came out. I think it was number one for like a week or two on Netflix, and there was a lot of buzz, and then it just goes away, just as quickly as it came. It's just because Netflix is always about moving on to the next new thing, right? That's what it seems like. You're always moving on to the next new thing. And sometimes what's kind of nice, though, is you do see older films trending and people are rediscovering things, which is nice to see as well, because that is the other side of Netflix. But it's just, it can be difficult to talk about. We had the same experience with Warrior Nun. The problem is that it's like, you've got several episodes, but what everybody seems to do is binge watch. They take it all at the same time, and then it makes it very hard to have any real commentary about it because everybody's already watched. Anybody who's interested in it has already watched the whole thing, and it doesn't seem like they really want to discuss it anymore. Because they're moving on to the next one to binge watch. Oddly enough, after I watched The Old Guard, I actually took your advice, Dave, and I watched Unsolved Mysteries, which has been out for quite a while, and I binge watched it. I just watched the whole thing. I watched all 6 episodes, So I can understand that phenomenon, because I experienced it myself,
Well, and I enjoyed the Unsolved Mysteries, the new one. I thought it was kind of, I mean, I guess for me it was interesting because it was kind of nostalgia, for Unsolved Mysteries. Like I liked the intro that they kept the music. I really liked the idea that they had like the homage, the kind of ghostly image of Robert Stack in the background, and it felt kind of like, what I remembered, but they've obviously changed and updated it. I think the most jarring thing about the new one is I feel like it's unfortunate that they don't have like that narrator person that kind of sets it up and then kind of brings it all home, which is what Robert Stack used to do.
That's my biggest criticism actually of Unsolved Mysteries is the lack of a host. But we do have a comment from the Rogues Gallery. Daniel Franks is in the house and he says Netflix, YouTube pacing, studio production value. And I think that's a pretty good insight right there.
Yeah.
It's got the sort of the pacing of YouTube, but with, better production value, and it just kind of cycles like that. It's like the way things work on YouTube is, and Dave and I have talked about this. It seems like everybody's always chasing the trends. They're always, whatever's trending, that's what people are trying to do. They're trying to be as topical as they possibly can. It's all about, fast reaction videos, gut reactions, just an immediate response, that kind of a thing. And then you move on to the next thing, And so it's kind of, I think, very similar to, that's kind of what Netflix does. And Daniel Franks mentions the real problem is reviewers aren't getting advanced copies or screenings with Netflix. And I think that's a valid point. I think that's definitely a valid point. Although for a lot of people that are doing broadcasting the way Dave and I are, we would never get advanced copies anyway. You have to be like you basically have to be a member of like the Associated Press or one of those theater critic associations or something like that. Then you get like advanced screeners and things like that. Guys, like I was mentioning, like Nerd Rock and Doomcock, they don't get advanced screeners either. You know what I mean? But they just go ahead and just talk about whatever's coming out as it comes out. I remember one of the things that Nerd Roddick used to do was like the night, like at midnight, when a new episode of Picard came out, he would be within 15 minutes of when the episode came out, he'd be on the air in the middle of the night talking about it, So, you have that ability to do that when you have a show that's coming out, once a week, that kind of a thing. And then you get to talk about the next episode next week. It really helps you kind of build that buzz. Even Dave and I doing the format we did where we were always basically a week behind, we still got a really good response of a lot of people that wanted to talk about the show because it was just topical, and unfortunately that just doesn't really happen with Netflix. You have to be like right on it. You have to be there like the day after it comes out. Otherwise you get buried,
Well, and I'm excited for we'll see what it ends up being like, but I am excited to talk about Lower Decks coming up. And that should be fun because we'll be able to do each episode as they come out, So, and yeah, we'll see. They finally announced Discovery Season 3 is coming in October. That's nice to know. Took forever for them to say that, but and I'm one of those weird people. It's like I'm curious to see what they do with Discovery Season 3. So, but we will be talking about Lower Decks, so that'll be fun, and that's kind of cool because that'll be one episode a week, so that should be entertaining. And I'm pretty excited to get to all that. So, well, so yeah. I mean, because I think we mentioned before we're gonna talk about the original Star Trek the animated series, as sort of like a precursor, kind of like we did with Picard. We talk about things that be good recommendations or whatever before. So we're going to do that, and I've already started rewatching episodes, and I kind of like the old Star Trek animated series by Filmation. So I think it's really cool. They got some of the original cast back, so to actually do voices for it. So that'll be fun. And then we'll see. We'll see once we get into Lower Decks what we think of it, and then obviously we'll see kind of how other people react to it, and see if more people want to come along and discuss it with us. So that should be fun.
I can tell you, the initial reaction I got was a lot of people saying, "Yeah, f that." You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
I know.
We'll see. We'll see how it goes,
because
it'll be interesting. Because I think the fact of the matter is that CBS All Access has burned a lot of bridges with the Trek fandom, created an intense amount of division that just doesn't need to be there. There's just no reason for it. But it is what it is. Maybe it's going to pay off for them. I don't know. I really don't know. I would think not, but you never know because.
I'm sort of still in that same place where I just find it kind of weird because, like Lower Decks, at least they're wearing uniforms and they're on starships, right?
Right.
And I talked about how part of the problem with Picard is that it was missing the proscenium, it was missing the trappings, it was missing, the sort of things that one thinks of as Star Trek, like the Delta shields and the uniforms and the communicators and just the way that helps it to feel like Star Trek, that it is missing all of that. And one of the things that I think is fun about Lower Decks is at least they're wearing uniforms, at least they're on starships, and so at least, so at least we'll have that to hold on to. And then they announced that Nickelodeon show too, as part of the Comic-Con at Home. They announced that their Nickelodeon show, which is called Prodigy. And then the crazy thing about Prodigy is, what is it? It's a bunch of teenage kids who apparently are going to steal a starship. So we're probably going to have no uniforms, no Delta shield.
I have a little bit. I have a real brief article on that.
All right.
For the Pop Culture News to talk about that.
So
now Bobby Chambers is in the house. He says hello. I shared the stream with a few groups. Let's get some rogues in here. We appreciate that, Bobby.
Cool.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
Bobby.
much. And we always appreciate when you come on the show and make your comments known. I'm not sure if you saw the Old Guard, Bobby, because if you did, I would be curious what your take on it. What your take on it is. But Dave, you were mentioning one of the issues that you had as far as Picard and kind of losing the standard trappings of what a Trek show is. One of the issues that I had with Picard, one of the big ones, is the contemporary nature of the characters, that they do not feel like they're people of the future. They actually feel like today's teenagers or something like that. Like you're not even like a normal person, like a normal thinking adult. They seem very, just very Hollywood, contemporary type characters. And that was one of my criticisms of the Old Guard as well. So as we mentioned, the premise is that these are immortals. So these are people that have lived, in some cases, thousands, hundreds of years at least, except for one character. And it was very difficult for me to believe that any of them were anything other than just contemporary adults out of manufactured Hollywood land. And I see this constantly with new things that are coming out. There's just no real attempt to say, hey, how would someone who actually lived, say, 1,000 years, how would they actually act? You know what I mean? How would they talk? No, I don't think they would talk Hollywood English, as I call it. The kind of Western Hollywood English, which is kind of the way I talk, right? I don't think they would talk like me because they would have grown up in a different culture, and regardless of the fact that they have seen other things and sort of moved on. I mean, there are people that live in this, that have lived in this country basically most of their lives, and they still hold on to their accent. I remember growing up with a guy that was from England. He moved here when he was like 6 or something like that, but he kept his English accent. You know what I mean? He kept it. You know what I mean? Because that was just like a thing for him. Because people are like that. They come from a certain culture. They have a pride in it, and they don't give it up. Arnold Schwarzenegger's a good example of this too. A lot of people think that he doesn't even have a real accent, but he just keeps it because it's part of his persona. It's part of who he is. You know what I mean? And you didn't have even like something like that in this. Charlize Theron is supposed to be like ancient. In fact, that's kind of like a little bit of a running joke in it, that they never tell you how old she actually is. And never did I believe for a second that she was some ancient from ancient times. Her attitudes weren't that way. Her attitudes were incredibly modern, super modern attitudes towards everything. It was just like, no, come on, guys, you can write this a little bit better. And quite frankly, I know as an actress, she's capable of more than that. I know she's a great actress. Give her something to work with. Give her an exotic accent. Can she not do an exotic accent? Something like that. I don't know, man. It's something that I see a lot, and it gets really frustrating for me because it just takes. I don't buy the world anymore. It just takes me out, and I'm just like, okay, I'm not buying this.
Interesting. We do have a couple comments. Bobby says, which I want to thank Bobby for his support of the Retro Rogues. Hopefully he'll be getting a package in the mail very soon. That also includes a couple of sketch cards I owed him. Actually, he won on the show previously. Bobby says that he missed this one, talking about the old guard, and said Charlize is great, so I'm going to have to check it out. And then Daniel Frank says that the two guys from the Crusades I bought. And then he also goes on to say, when you're immortal, the first skill you master is hiding and blending in, which I would say I would imagine that is true, but it is. But at the same point too, the characters do need to kind of click in such a manner that you believe their backstory. So I can see what Eric is saying as well. And in my imagination of what I thought this movie was about, the characters, at least in my imagination, would have been a little bit more unique and identifiable in relation to, who they were in relation to their past. But again, unfortunately, I passed out. I wish I could say I was drinking. I passed out. But it wasn't even drinking. I was just exhausted. So. But anyhow, cool. Do we think we're pretty good talking about the old guard? Are we ready to move on to?
Yeah, I think we stretched that as much as we can.
All right. Okay. All right.
But we do have another comment that Daniel had from earlier, talking about Lower Decks. He says Lower Decks is going to suffer the same issue Space Force did, which I have not watched Space Force, Daniel. Space requires competency. You're going to lose your audience when your humor comes from their incompetence. And I can totally see that, Daniel, based on the trailer. I can tell you I have the same concern. But the central premise of Lower Decks is that this is like the B team or the Z team, if you will. This is these second contact people. That's their specialty. So, and that's the actual bridge crew. That's what they do. And then, of course, we're talking about the main characters are actually going to be, supporting crew members that literally work on the lower decks. That's sort of the premise there. So it is comedic. We've never really had a straight Star Trek comedy. Star Trek has always done comedy. I think it actually has done it quite well. And I like a lot of the comedic aspects of Star Trek. Star Trek 4 comes to mind as something that has a lot of really good comedy in it. But we've never had them to, any Trek be a comedy per se. So this is going to be, definitely a new frontier. There's no doubt about that. Right, Dave?
Right. Yeah. Well, and like I said, we'll see soon enough. I like I said, the one thing I'm looking forward to about it is that at least it's nice that we'll be on starships and they'll be wearing uniforms and at least hopefully, at least visually, it'll make more sense that we are actually, in a Star Trek show. Because there were times with Picard where I felt like I could have been, watching a weird spin-off series from Firefly or something. Like it's just random dudes in space, So okay, that was my overall impression of Picard.
I think that the even though I'm not a big Firefly guy, I understand the premise and everything like that. So I can definitely see it. You know what I mean? I can definitely see that this is. Well, again, actually, they weren't supposed to be the A-team either. So
right.
That was kind of, they even called themselves, I remember, in the behind the scenes things that Will Wheaton did. They said that they called themselves the Motley Crew.
Right.
With some sort of ironic pride, as if that's a good thing. I guess that's a good thing now, because it's not good to be, actually good at your job and actually be competent and actually be optimistic. That's bad now. can't do that. That's passe.
Right. That does seem to be the general way that people seem to want to treat certain things right now. So that's definitely for sure. At least as far as, you know, and that's the thing. I don't know. It's even Discovery season 3. It's like more than half of the footage they keep showing us. It's like Burnham isn't wearing a uniform. We hardly see the Discovery actually in the trailer. It seems like they're doing everything they can to run away from all the classic Trek trappings as far as they can, and that's sort of my thing. I feel like that's not good. You get too far away from it, and it's just a random sci-fi show. It's not really Star Trek anymore if you take too many of those things away.
Yeah, that's definitely true. That's a good segue into our pop culture segment, if you want to set that up, Dave. Because
all right,
actually,
cool.
one of the big things I want to talk about that we talked about before was Comic-Con at home, and specifically something that happened with Star Trek that we talked about, with the Star Trek panel and some of the other issues they had.
Okay, very cool. So we'll set this up just real quick. So here in the pop culture news segment, we talk about anything happening in the world of pop culture news that we think you, our dear valued viewer, our dear valued listener, might find interesting. It could be anything that catches either mine or Eric's attention that we think you might enjoy discussing, or we think you, hopefully, should know about. So tell me, Eric, what do you have up first for this week's installment of Pop Culture News?
Well, as I always try to mention, if I'm going to be negative, I try to start out negative, so the only place to go is up. I don't think I don't know how much our viewers realize this, but I was very excited about Comic-Con at home, and I thought that this was an interesting idea. I thought that this was a way for me to kind of experience Comic-Con again after so many years of not being able to go, and after so many years of having gone and having so many experiences at Comic-Con, which were very positive. I had a lot of fun at Comic-Con. I also had a lot of learning at Comic-Con, made a lot of mistakes. So there was definitely a lot to it in terms of how I was thinking about it. Once Comic-Con at home actually came, though, it just didn't really resonate with me the way that I was hoping it would. And I think Variety did a perfect job summing up what the issues were. So here's an article from Variety. It says, "Why Comic-Con at Home was a bust." And there were some issues. There were some definite issues. It says, if a fan convention is held on the internet and no one that's there to talk about it, does it make any noise? Very philosophical right there, right? Very philosophical.
Yeah, that's true.
But one of the specific things that they talk about is they had some, like A-list type panels. They had one for The Walking Dead. They had that Star Trek Universe panel that we've kind of alluded to a little bit. They were promoting 2 of Keanu Reeves' movies, including, I believe, the Bill and Ted movie that's coming out. So they had all this different kind of stuff that, could have, should have been, really exciting and kind of, people should have been like really hyped for and all that stuff. But it says, according to data from the social media analytics from Listen First, tweets that mentioned Comic-Con at Home were down 95% from 2019's live convention. Just 93,681 tweets over the 5-day event against 1,719,000 tweets in 2019. Now, of course, you would anticipate that it would be very hard to emulate the hype of the live event of San Diego Comic-Con virtually. But that's really bad. That's bad. 95% reduction is just intensely bad, because also keep in mind, it's not like they're competing against some other live events that are happening, because nothing's happening right now. Actually, there was something else that was happening that I'll talk about later. That's a more positive story, but I didn't know about this. But there was actually a competing event that actually I think created a little bit more buzz than Comic-Con at Home did. So the obviously, they say that numbers don't lie. It doesn't tell the whole story, but the tweets were way down, and they had some problems. The biggest success, I would say, is probably New Mutants, and that's what this article also says, that New Mutants, they got about over 200,000 views on YouTube, which is not too shabby. Obviously, that's pretty darn good. I actually watched a lot of that. I watched a lot of that panel and thought that there was some interest in it. But I'll tell you the main thing, and this article talks about it. The thing that really made me kind of like deflate over Comic-Con was realizing that none of these panels were live and that there was basically no fan interaction. In fact, this article talks about how the comment sections were actually turned off for Comic-Con at home.
Wow.
So
even the comment sections were off?
The comment sections were off for a lot of these panels, if not all of them. And that just is just like completely unacceptable to me. And they could have done so much better with a little bit of more foresight,
Well, and that feels like that I didn't really miss anything, because everything I saw of it, part of the reason I didn't bother to chime in and look at any of it is because based off the stuff I was seeing, it just looked like a bunch of lame YouTube videos. It's like, hey, look, here's a giant Zoom call with the cast of whatever. And, it's like, okay, all right. But if they had the comment section off, if they weren't taking any questions at all from people who wanted to watch, then because that negates the whole thing. Like that's one of the fun things about the Hall H stuff is when the people line up and they do ask, the question they shouldn't ask, or it's some co-star who isn't on stage who's sitting out in the audience, or someone shows up dressed as another character and then they put forth a rumor about something they heard about one of the people on stage playing someone else and some other thing. And, like that's part of the whole fun is the interaction. And I know sometimes you can't control what people say and what they do, but you take all that interaction away and then it really isn't Comic-Con at home. Then it's just like, here's a promotional video for X whatever show. And here's the cast.
And they fell short on that mark too. Because like this article mentions, it says the only major Marvel panel at Comic-Con at home for the Disney Plus docuseries Marvel's 616, which is about the history of Marvel. And they included two clips from the show that had already been released to YouTube the day before. So they actually undermined their panel. In other words, they released the clips the day before their panel. Similarly, they say we got a release date for Bill and Ted Face the Music, which will, by the way, pretty big news there, and that they're going to be doing video on demand and select theaters on September 1st. So they've got a hard date. They're just going to go for it. But that announcement was made 2 days before their panel on Saturday. So even by the mark that you're talking about, where these are like, where we're just treating, let's say we're just treating Comic-Con as just, hey, it's just promotional videos to put out there. Well, they undermine that as well, with some of their biggest material. And then we talked about this. There was the Star Trek Universe panel, and they basically spent 20 minutes doing this live reading. They actually got shut down because of the analytics malfunctioning. Both, I put that on CBS and YouTube. Both, I mean, just totally unacceptable that would happen. So as when it was first going out, like 15 minutes of it just kind of went away for a while. It's fixed now, so like if you go view it now, you don't have that problem. But the other thing is,
like they were talking about, oh shoot, what was the name of it? The show that we were, darn it. See, I just totally blanked on it. Keep going. I'm sorry. I had a funny joke and then I blanked, and now it's not funny. Keep going.
So the big issue there, and Dave, you talked about it before, was that they made this announcement, but they made this announcement about Star Trek Discovery coming out October 15th on Monday, days after their actual panel that got screwed up. I mean, it's just like, come on. You know what I mean? Like you guys knew that Star Trek Discovery, you knew the date it was going to come out. You have this big panel, which, by the way, I saw some of it where they were doing the table reading. It was actually almost ridiculous because they basically had they had the entire cast. So, I mean, it was like Brady Bunch on overload as far as all the faces on the screen as they were doing this table reading. And, you have all that participation, and then you don't even announce, when the show is coming out, and then you do it as a side thing on Monday. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense at all. It's just terrible planning on like everybody's part, and it really makes you feel like, well, what was the point? And Daniel says it right here. It's like, if there isn't fan interaction, is it really a convention? And I would say no, it's absolutely not a convention, virtual or not. You've got to have the fan interaction. You've got to have some of those live questions and things like that. Now, Daniel made another point earlier. He says there's no reason to tweet. And I was talking about the tweets were way down. He said everyone is experiencing the same thing. Conversation occurs when there is a divergence of experience, and that's a great point. That's absolutely a great point.
Well, and it's interesting because one of the few successes, it sounds like, of the things that kind of clicked with people, is for I'm surprised in all honesty that New Mutants, managed to find 200,000 views. But I think it's because there's interest in New Mutants. There's pent-up demand for New Mutants. We've been hearing about this movie for a long time, and there's a lot of us like myself that are excited to see New Mutants. And the idea that they're still theoretically going to release it in theaters and that they try and poke fun with it with fingers crossed, and their little teaser or whatever, I still feel like they're missing the boat with this. I think New Mutants is perfect for a VOD, release. And to be honest, it could be used to bolster, we're not doing streaming wars at the moment, but it could be used to bolster, subscriptions for things like, Hulu. I don't think it really fits with Disney Plus, but, I'm still surprised they're still going to try and release it in theaters. I mean, I don't want theaters to fail. That's not my goal, but I'm just saying with everything that's going on, that seems like the one thing you could release at home. I've been talking about that in my own way, fighting for that since, we started the show here. But it's interesting because
I've got more bad news for you than Dave.
Oh, great.
And great. So this was an article I was thinking I might not even use, but you walked right into it, so I got to use it. This is a Screen Rant article, and it says why New Mutants can't release first on Disney Plus, Hulu, or VOD. And it says director Josh Boone has revealed that due to contractual obligations, the New Mutants has to be released in theaters before it hits streaming. End of story. That's what he apparently came straight from his mouth. He's basically said that cannot happen. So as far as we can tell, there's a very high probability New Mutants is going to be moved again because they are not going to be doing what Bill and Ted is doing, which is release on both at the same time.
Well, by the time they finally release it, maybe no one will finally actually care.
But that's the story there, at least according to the director. They have some sort of contractual obligation. Obviously, New Mutants was announced, ages ago. You know what I mean? That's been, in the pipeline for quite a while. They mentioned that during the panel, the part that I was watching as well. They were talking about, we did this movie like how long ago? You know what I mean? Like all the actors are going to be like old and gray by the time that the movie actually comes out. Everybody be like, who's that? So
right.
But that's apparently the story there is that they just apparently there's some sort of legal issue that they can't do it. And James, I said it. I try to get the bad news out first. I promise no more bad news. Well, maybe later.
All right.
But he's saying they're going to be adults by the time the movie came out. I think they're already adults. Yeah. You know what I mean? I don't think any of them are teenagers anymore, honestly. So
yeah, I think that ship has sailed. Whatever they would, it's done. So, I do have a couple of things for pop culture tonight. They're a little bit different. I want to make sure that people understand that the two stories I'm about to set up, these are things I think are interesting. We're not being paid to promote these in any way, form, or fashion. They are crowd-funded campaigns for things I thought was kind of interesting that I thought would be worth, just kind of mentioning because I thought they were kind of cool. And this is something hopefully we'll be continuing to do more of as we move forward, highlighting and talking about projects that are interesting. And if you our dear valued viewer listener, if you have an interesting project that you're either a part of or you find interesting or you think is worth covering, please, send a direct message to myself or Eric. Tell us a little bit about it, and maybe we'll cover it here on the Retro Rogues. So, Eric, if you don't mind sharing my screen, this is one of the projects I thought was kind of interesting. This is on Kickstarter right now. I just thought this was kind of cool. I didn't realize this existed, but it's called Morphonauts, and they're like magnetic action figures. I don't know if I'm kind of an old guy, but back in the day, they used to have like Batman and Robin, a lot of these other figures, and they had magnets on them. You could stick them to things. And then, of course, they used to have the die-cast metal figures, too, which are always kind of cool. But I thought this is kind of interesting. I'm not going to play the video because I don't want to cause any sort of contractual thing or us to get copyright struck or whatever. But I thought this was kind of an interesting thing. But the way these toys work is they're magnetic, so you can take them apart and reassemble them, the different pieces for the different characters, and kind of make your own little kind of figures and stuff. And I thought they were kind of cool and interesting. And I thought this was neat too, because it was an interesting mix to me of, I don't know if many people remember Power Lords, but there was that toy line back in the day called Power Lords. It reminded me of a cross between Power Lords and actually Micronauts, which I thought was interesting. So I thought this was kind of cool. I thought I would just kind of point it out. But they've got like little mutant characters and human characters and robots and mech things. And this I thought is something that's interesting for those of us that grew up with this kind of, fantastical, escapism, high concept toy line type of stuff. But then also too, it might be something that, those of us who are watching who have children, your kids might find it interesting too. So I just thought this was kind of cool. So I thought you'd heard about this. Had you, Eric, the Morphonauts?
I did not. They do look interesting. They do definitely remind me of the Micronauts, and I'm sure that's intentional because the name is so similar. Micronauts was a little bit before my time, but my brother had them. So, I grew up with, kind of looking through his toys and stuff like that. And they definitely kind of reminds me of that little bit. I've had some figures like that over the course of my lifetime, the kinds that are interchangeable where you can switch the arms and the legs. That's pretty cool. That video you have on right now, kind of showing how you can customize the figures and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of neat. And because I like these kind of things. And this is actually a project that I haven't pledged to support it just yet, but I'm seriously considering it. I thought it was kind of fun and kind of cool. And I thought those of us that are here that are sort of retro fans would appreciate this kind of interesting kind of concept. Because like I said, it reminds you of things like Power Lords. It reminds you of things like Micronauts. And so that's the whole reason I wanted to showcase it. And again, we're not getting paid to support this. I just thought it was cool. And I thought people might find it interesting. So anyhow, but yeah, the Morphonauts here is kind of a cool idea. Kind of interesting thing. They've got some.
Oh, that's interesting. So it looks like, are they doing some licensed stuff too there?
It looks like
because I'm seeing all sorts of
make your own customization. Yeah, looks like they're doing custom where you could repaint them and customize them.
He-Man, Marvel, all sorts of different stuff there. Spawn, like the Mario. I think I even saw Star Wars. I think I saw Boba Fett. That's interesting. That's definitely interesting. I wonder how that's all going to work. Man of Sand definitely says, Morphonauts reminds me a bit of the Micronauts in the look and style. Micronauts were also made of die-cast metal. So definitely, I think we're on the same page there, Man of Sand. By the way, great to see you commenting on the show.
Yeah, so anyhow, that's enough about that. I wanted to highlight that. And I've got one other one that's almost basically the same thing. And I wanted to kind of plug it too. And again, we're not getting paid to promote these. This is just things I think are interesting. So
Matt, we're getting paid is what you're saying. We are going to get paid for this is what you're telling me.
No. No, we're not. We are not getting paid for any of this. This is just because I think they're fun. So Fresh Monkey Fiction, they've been doing this line of figures called Amazing Heroes for a while. And what it is they're sort of these public domain golden age superheroes normally. And they've been kind of working their way through a lot of the catalog of these characters kind of over the years. So they've been doing these different waves. So this is wave 5. There's a particular figure in here I wanted to highlight, and then I wanted to mention some of the ones that they have available for those of us that are diehard collectors. So I've actually supported some of these in the past because I love these Golden Age characters. Now this is not full of a lot of Golden Age characters, but there's one character in particular in here that I wanted to highlight. So they're getting ready to do wave 5. So for those of us that have been around for a little while, we'll probably recognize Mr. Monster here, and then also the Badger, actually from First Comics, and then E-Man. I thought these were kind of cool. So the general gist of this is that they're done in the style of, let's see, they're done in the style of the old Marvel Secret Wars figures, that kind of style. But they've gotten to the point now where they're not just doing the Golden Age characters, but they're segueing over. So I really liked Michael Gilbert's Mr. Monster back in the day, and I thought it was really cool they were doing a Mr. Monster figure. So this is the one in particular I'm specifically looking at backing and trying to get a copy of. And I've bought Black Terror and some of the other characters actually from the previous waves. And then, of course, E-Man, which is, of course, a Joe Staton character some people may be familiar with. And then, of course, the Badger. I know the Badger more from originally his guest starring bit he had in the Nexus back in the day. And this same group, the same company, Fresh Monkey Fiction, they'd actually done a Nexus figure with the last wave, and I totally missed the last wave. But these are kind of cool. And then you can see this is their wave 6. They're getting ready to do. Atom Man is on here. I mentioned trying to pick up Atom Man specifically. And then they're doing a Larry Hama action figure, which is kind of cool. So they got some fun stuff that they're doing here. I thought it would be interesting to kind of point them out. And then what they have right now, which was wave 4, is available. And then this would be a big one for a lot of people. They actually have a Golden Age Blue Beetle figure that's available now. He's, they're collector's items. They're, probably more than you would expect to normally pay, but I just think they're really cool. And I thought it would be fun to kind of highlight what Fresh Monkey Fiction is doing with the Golden Age characters and some of these other characters. A lot of us might have, grew up reading back in the day, such as Badger, and then also, again, Mr. Monster. So just wanted to kind of highlight that. I thought it was kind of cool. They're doing their own kind of Kickstarter thing where they're doing it themselves in-house as opposed to actually going through Kickstarter, which is interesting because a lot of people might be like, well, wait a minute. But a lot of people don't realize there were people doing Kickstarter-type programs before Kickstarter ever existed. For example, Steam Crow, which has been a guest on the podcast version of this show a couple years ago. Steam Crow actually was the Daniel and Donna Davis. They were the first 2 people I see to even do anything like this. And when they were doing it back then, it was before Kickstarter existed. They were doing it on their own. So this is not unheard of. But again, like I said, I just thought it would be interesting to kind of highlight this out. Like I said, I'm looking to probably try and pick up a Mr. Monster myself, but I know a lot of the retro rogues are probably an audience. They might be familiar with the Badgers too. So I thought it'd be worth, kind of highlighting it. It's more collectibles, kind of toy type stuff. But I thought this and the Morphonauts project were kind of interesting. So, well, I'll probably do, like, if you're interested in this is at freshmonkeyfiction.com is where you can find the information on this. And then, of course, the Morphonauts here is actually on Kickstarter. They have some stuff that they're doing actually on Facebook that's kind of showing up. But you could actually just go to Kickstarter. I just went to Kickstarter, just typed in Morphonauts, and then brought it up. So, but this one's kind of cool too. I'm seriously thinking about trying to get 1 or 2 of these guys. I think they're kind of cool. So there you go. That's my pop culture this week.
Bobby Chambers agrees with the Morphonauts. He says that customization is very cool. The other what's it called? Monkey? What's it called? A line of action figures is actually called Amazing Heroes.
but Fresh Monkey Fiction is the company that's been producing them.
Okay, Fresh Monkey Fiction. So I'm not familiar with most of those characters. I think the only one that really came to mind was Blue Beetle. But I love the look of a lot of them. A lot of them look really cool. And I remember Secret Wars. I had a Captain America from the Secret Wars line. I remember that line pretty well. So I definitely know what that style is like and everything, and that's pretty cool. So as you mentioned, though, these are not these are like kind of premium collectible type things, right?
Well, the Amazing Heroes definitely is, but kids could play with them. But I think the Morphonauts specifically, they talk about in this Kickstarter campaign for Morphonauts. They even have a little graphic here where they say, who is this for? It's for kids. It's for collectors. It's for people that like to do customization. So, Morphonauts is very clearly aimed at a very broad audience, a large audience, in the hopes that they'll get people interested in what they're doing. So I think this is like I said, I just thought this one was cool, like, because I like the little alien insect kind of looking characters, and I don't know, I just thought it was kind of fun. So
I definitely like that message, because one of the things that I've seen, and I've seen it actually from other channels, is, it's like every fandom seems to be getting polarized and toxic and all that kind of stuff. And toy collectors are not immune from that. I got some pretty good hate from another YouTuber that I'm not going to name on the air. But one of his main points is that he feels like the bigger companies don't know who to market to anymore, because they should be very specific. You know what I mean? Are they going for the collector? Are they going for the kids? What are they doing? Well, these guys say, screw all that. We're just going to make it for everybody.
Yeah.
So kind of flying in the face of that elitist kind of crap that I see from a lot of big collectors, quite frankly. So it's kind of nice to see that somebody is doing this in a independent vein, as opposed to one of the larger companies where they are saying, hey, this is for everybody. It's for the kids, it's for collectors, and it's for customizers. So it's you're all included, Yeah. You don't see that a lot right now. You just don't.
And this reminds me of that crazy fantastical thing, like, I don't know if many of our viewers would be familiar, but it reminds me of something like Chrystar. It reminds me of, like I mentioned earlier, it reminds me of Micronauts. It reminds me of, Power Lords. It reminds me of, that kind of cool toy, kind of a fun, high concept, fantastical, science fictional kind of a world. I mean, in all honesty, if I had the money to contact these guys for licensing, I'd love to do the comic book tie-in for this.
Yeah.
I think that would be a lot of fun. I'd love to print their shirts, So, yeah. But that's not my angle on this. I'm kind of promoting it and showing it off because I just think it's a cool concept and I think it's fun. So that's the main goal. So, but enough about that before people think I am shilling. I just think it's kind of fun. So there you go. I just think it's fun, everybody. That's it. I think it's cool. So, of course, I'm also an old man, so what do I know about what's cool, right? There you go. So that's all I got for pop culture this week. I just wanted to talk about fun and collectible action figures, as I often do on this show, which is funny. When we first started talking about the pop culture news segment before we started doing it, I never imagined I'd be talking about Funko Pops and action figures and toys. But every once in a while I come across something, I go, "This is kind of cool. Like, we should talk about this. This is fun." These are the kind of fun things I'd love to be doing. Myself. I think they're really kind of cool. So,
yeah, it's it's a fun hobby to collect, and I was collecting for quite a while. And I've mentioned it on the air previously and talked to you about it off the air as well. Unfortunately, I just don't have any place to put anything anymore. And I feel like it's such a waste to have all this stuff and it's just sitting in the closet. It's like the stuff is meant to be displayed, whether you want to display it in the box or not. That's up to you as a collector. But definitely, I would say one of the funnest parts about collecting is having that big sort of trophy room full of stuff. If it's sitting in a box somewhere, I don't know, man. That's just I don't really see the point of that as much. So
Right.
definitely, toys are meant to be displayed. And again, up to you whether you display it out of the box or in the box. That's a collector's preference, but still, I think it's important to display the stuff.
And one of the things I think is cool about this in particular is they're also looking at this actually for kids. This is something fun for kids to play with too. And it'd be kind of cool to support this Kickstarter and introduce your son, your daughter, or whatever to that fun, high concept thing, like we might have experienced when we just found, again, Power Lords or Micronauts or whatever on a peg in a toy store. It's that same kind of thing. Because this just reminds me that kind of like fun, cool thing you just kind of stumble across. I'm like, I don't know what this is, but it's fun. When I bought my first He-Man action figure, which back then was just Masters Universe. When I bought my first Masters Universe figure, I bought Man at Arms because I thought he was cool. I didn't really know much about him at all, and this was the same thing when I bought my first Power Lords figure, when I bought my first Micronauts, like it was just, I remember one of my favorite figures as a kid was actually Chrystar. I don't know if many people remember Chrystar, but he was a blue crystal looking guy, and he was kind of like Conan-ish with a sword and everything. And I was just like, wow, this is cool, and I had that figure until it broke because he just looked so cool and it was so much fun. So yeah. So anyhow,
that's very cool.
Do you have anything else for pop culture, or we
yes.
good to...
So I mentioned earlier that there was another event that apparently was going on as Comic-Con at Home was going on, and I didn't know about this, but it's very interesting who they got involved. So this is a CNET article. It says Zack Snyder shows new footage of Superman's black suit from the Snyder Cut. It said during Justice Con, Snyder gives a video preview of Henry Cavill as Superman wearing his black suit, and fans share their excitement. Dave, did you know about Justice Con?
So I didn't know.
You can hear about that?
Well, we just had a brief little glitch there, I think, in the stream. But I had not heard about Justice Con, but I did see the aftermath of the reveal of the black suit Superman, which I thought was really cool. It's the scene that we'd seen in the trailer where basically there's a character who shows up to talk to Alfred, and Alfred is like working on a car, and he's like, he said you'd come. I hope it's not too late. So it's that same scene. And it was interesting too, because I remember originally when the first trailers and stuff, came out, a lot of people wondered, is that Green Lantern? Is that so-and-so? Is that this person? Is that person? And then by the time we get to the film itself, they've color timed it in such a way that if you're looking at the trailer, you could definitely tell that it's probably Superman. And it wasn't a big reveal or shock, I think, that Superman would be returning, obviously, in the film. The thing I found most interesting is that they shot all this stuff with Cavill in the black suit all along, and basically Zack Snyder was really hoping that they would be able to do that, and they could do Cavill in the black suit, because I did dig into this further when these images started to hit the internet. And then Snyder actually said that the whole point of it was the fact that the red and gold and the classic Superman costume had basically been destroyed in his battle with Doomsday, and this other suit is what remains that's still in the Kryptonian ship. So when he shows up, it's like these different things, these different suits and stuff come out, and this is one of the suits that he has available just to put on, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that does actually make a lot of sense when you think about Man of Steel and what the Kryptonians actually were wearing. That actually makes sense. That's actually a good call there. That's actually some continuity there. As far as what was established in the other films. So that's a pretty cool explanation right there.
No, but I'm very much excited and looking forward to the Snyder Cut whenever it hits. I'm just waiting to do my HBO Max subscription until it's, the Snyder Cut is actually there. Because that's kind of my thing. It's like I want to make sure that the subscription to that, because this is one of the more expensive services, HBO Max is. I want to make sure that it's worth the money. So
yeah, absolutely. So I do have the scene queued up here, so we can kind of share it there.
Yeah, and then again, this is the same scene that had been in the trailer and had been shown previously, but the only difference is it turns out that it's well, there you go. It looks like we just got
Yep. They're not liking
there you go. They're not going to let us share it. Isn't that funny? See, that's the thing I don't get. It's like we're literally promoting the Zack Snyder cut on our show. It's not like we're trying to somehow monetize their content. We're not monetizing your content. No one pays to watch our show. We're not behind a paywall. We don't even have sponsors, for Lord's sake. And that's the thing that kills me. It's like, we just want to talk about something that's cool. And they're like, no, you cannot. You can't show that cool thing. We're not going to let you. And I don't understand all this stuff. And that's the irony, going back to what happened to CBS with their Star Trek Universe panel. They had that stuff turned up so high that it literally knocked them off of their straight up Comic-Con at Home show. Like you're literally supposed to be promoting your stuff, and you've got the security and everything set so high that you even get your own thing pulled off YouTube because you are even violating a copyright. And it's like, well, wait, we are the ones who make the thing. How can we be? But yeah, I don't know. I don't get it.
James says, boo, they filtered the clip.
That's the thing. It's like, why? Like, we just want to show you the black suit Superman and say, this is cool, we're excited. But they've got everything so ginned up, or whatever term you want to use. They've got all this security and everything so high, we can't even just go, isn't this fun?
Well, my understanding also was that unlike Comic-Con at Home, Justice Con did have fan interaction. So fans were allowed to actually, do questions, interact with the panel, that kind of thing. I didn't get to see the panel itself. In fact, I didn't even know about it until I was prepping for the show today. And I came across this and I was like, oh, wow. I didn't even know they were. First of all, I had no idea what Justice Con was. And I was like, Zack Snyder was involved with it. And he actually was promoting the Snyder Cut and actually showing footage. And wow, that's pretty cool, Perfect thing for Comic-Con to have been doing. But apparently they weren't. So.
Yeah, and I know too. I think he was on Grace Randolph's show as well, and he's been out there and promoting. And the thing that's really cool is that he is taking questions and stuff from people, and he is interacting with fans. And he's been interacting with fans the whole time. I think that's part of why there's so much excitement about his completed, restored version of Justice League, is the fact that it feels like it is something he's doing for the fans and because he's a fan.
Well, he knows the only reason he's doing it is because of the fans. The fans are the ones who brought the Snyder Cut. And I wasn't part of that movement at all. I'm actually fine with Justice League the way it came out. I actually enjoyed it. I didn't like Man of Steel, and I hated Batman versus Superman. But it's not like I'm going to be all sitting here like, well, they shouldn't release the Snyder Cut because, no. I understand. I understand the excitement. I understand that people wanted to see it, and they actually went out there and they basically were pounding the pavement. They made noise, and HBO Max is listening to you and saying, hey, we're going to do this, So, good for them. And I think Snyder understands that. He understands the fact that the only reason this is happening is because of the fans.
Yeah, and I'm one of those people. It's like I didn't hate Man of Steel. I had some issues with Batman v Superman, but most of my issues, which was on an old in the studio retrospective show. We actually did a what we used to call what we used to call it? It was After Dark or something like that. I forget what we called it. We had some weird moniker we used for it. But anyhow, we did, because whenever we did something that was current and contemporary, we had like some weird moniker like After Dark or something. It felt like some really crazy, inappropriate Skinamax thing. We intentionally leaned into that because I thought it was funny. But we talked about we did actually review and talk about Suicide Squad, and we also did Batman v Superman, which my co-host at the time, the Janimal, like he still to this day talks about how he watches Batman v Superman because he hates that movie so much. And I didn't hate it. I felt like it was some missed opportunity. Like I keep coming back to the same idea. It's like if it hadn't been, some nameless executive we've never seen or heard from before who dies at the beginning of the movie, if that actually had been, even though, because it doesn't have to totally make sense, but if that had been Morgan Freeman reprising his role as Lucius Fox, and he had been the one who died in the tower, and then Bruce is like, oh no, and he can't get to him, and he saves the kid, and then the Wayne Enterprises tower falls, and you realize that he just like lost Lucius Fox, who was one of his allies and someone who helped equip him with his gadgets, and like he was a confidant and a friend and someone he could trust. Even if it doesn't exactly sync up, at least you as a movie fan, someone who's seen the Batman movies, at least you get the connection. It would be like as if Alfred had been in the tower and had died at the beginning of the movie. And then it helps you to understand his rage and his anger. Because when it's just some nameless executive, it's like, well, okay. But it you don't have that resonance. You don't have that connection with that character.
I think it should have been Chris O'Donnell. Should have been Chris O'Donnell. And then people would have been like, oh, why does he care that the guy from NCIS died?
But
for those of you who don't know, Chris O'Donnell actually played Robin.
Robin. Yeah.
The current audience would be like, why does he care about that NCIS? Well, he must be a big fan of NCIS, huh? Yeah. It might have resonated better too, though. It might have resonated better too.
That's what I'm saying. Even at that, I mean, he could have just. That's the thing. It's like they needed a better connection, a better hook for you to understand, Bruce's rage and Bruce's anger. I personally feel like that's something they could have done. But anyhow,
I do not dig killing the killing version of Batman. I just don't. I've never dug it. I don't like any of the Marvel superheroes killing. I'm not Marvel, DC. I think that's one of the big differences between DC and Marvel. That's one of the reasons I like DC, why I'm a DC guy, and say that, even though I love Marvel too. There's a lot I love in Marvel. But the fact of the matter is, Superman doesn't kill. That's not supposed to kill. Same with Batman. I know there's an argument about Superman 2 and the fact of like, well, didn't he kill Zod and his crew in Superman 2? And it's like, well, it's kind of ambiguous. Did he, or did he just kind of like banish them? You know what I mean? There's some ambiguity there, whether as far as what he actually did to them. You know what I mean? Of course, that's also the infamous, throwing the little that Superman trap thing and all that kind of stuff. And so,
yeah,
I know there's a lot of controversy, but I love that film. I mean, I love Superman too. And I'm talking about the original version. I like the Donner cut as well, but I'm talking about the original version, is the one I grew up on and watched all the time. So, and I own both. I own the theatrical cut, and I own the Donner cut. So, I don't know. This is the way that I think. It's just I didn't like Superman breaking Zod's neck. I can understand quote unquote why he did it. I just don't know why we had to go there. I hated the way they did Pa Kent. Man, I couldn't stand the way they did Pa Kent. I was like, that's terrible. That's not Pa Kent. Pa Kent wouldn't be like that. No,
yeah, thanks. And you're hitting on some of my major gripes. Some of the things they did that I didn't like. Like, for example, that scene where Superman's going to the top of the mount, well, whatever mountain it is, and then the idea is that if you get to that level of altitude and deprivation and whatever and altitude change, that it can cause you to see visions. Because he's on a vision quest, and then when he gets to the top, because of the lack of oxygen or whatever, he sees his father and has that sort of moment. And it's an interesting idea, except for the fact that he can fly in space and hold his breath for I think 6 hours or 4 hours at a stretch or something. So how in the world did Superman walking to the top of a mountain cause him to see a vision of his father? It doesn't make any sense. So you're hitting on the same things that I picked on and didn't like, in the other ones. But there's still a lot of other things that I kind of enjoyed and kind of liked about those movies. So I'm looking forward to the Snyder cut, And then
Biggest thing I liked.
as you can tell from my shirt, I don't mind those heroes who sometimes feel like that they need to take care of business.
And that's fine. Like I said, I don't say that I don't just diminish Marvel because I like DC more. I just think that's the contrast, and that's why I give DC the edge, because their heroes are truly heroic. Wolverine's a great example of that. He's the beginning of all that anti-hero crap that I'm kind of sick of. I'm over it. You know what I mean? I've been seeing it for so often. I don't want it anymore. I would like to see a real hero.
I think the anti-hero can be great, but only when you're able to contrast him with the opposite.
Exactly.
Captain America standing next to Punisher is an interesting, examination of polar opposites. They're not really polar opposites though, because Captain America is a soldier. I mean, that's another great example. He is a killer. He's a soldier. He's the ultimate super soldier. In fact, I think part of Punisher's backstory eventually is that Captain America trains him. I mean, I remember a person telling me about that Captain America at some point actually ends up training the Punisher, which kind of makes sense because they're both supposed to be like soldiers. You know what I mean? So, that also too, that's a more modern interpretation. Like if you go back, I mean, Captain America represents an idea. I mean, he's a soldier, yes, but he kind of represents this idea. And then the Punisher is very much just a street level, vigilante. When they did the comic book version of Civil War, there's actually a really great moment in that where the Punisher, like these villains show up and they go, "We don't believe in what's happening, and we're here to help you guys," and they want to team up with Captain America's team. And then without missing a beat, the Punisher guns them all down. And then everyone's slightly horrified. The Punisher's like, what? Because that's what he does, right? And then Captain America, basically yells at him and knocks him around because he's like, this is not what you're, that's what I'm saying. It's like there's an opposite between those two characters to an extent. And so, whenever you can use that to highlight the difference between them, well, we use X-Men, for example, the difference in style, approach, and methodology between Wolverine and Cyclops, they're two completely, or even Colossus and Wolverine, they're just.
No, I've always enjoyed the dynamic between Cyclops and Wolverine, and that's a great example because I liked Cyclops more than I liked Wolverine. I thought Wolverine was a terrible character when I first saw him because I first saw him on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and he got his ass kicked by Juggernaut, and he got his claws stuck in the wall. So that was my first experience with Wolverine. I thought he was a big dork. And I loved Cyclops. I thought Cyclops' power was so cool, and he was very straight-laced. He's the leader. So I was always a Cyclops guy, which is ironic because now nobody's a Cyclops guy anymore. Everybody's a Wolverine guy. You know what I mean? So let's get the Rogues gallery is actually talking here. So Bobby made a good point that I actually saw something about this. He said Snyder's last interview about the cut was aggressive. He is not a Joss fan, laugh out loud. And I heard about that he actually put some major shade as far as the person who ended up directing Justice League. I heard that Snyder did put some massive shade on him as far as saying that, that would not have been my choice to finish the project, that kind of a thing. So Bobby also asks, did you guys enjoy Superman Returns? A good deal of mixed reviews with that one.
Well, and I can chime in that I quite enjoyed Superman Returns. I felt like that at the time, the thing most interesting about Superman Returns is the fact that I felt like they actually did try to actually advance Superman's story with if you've seen the film, they introduce actually a new element, a new concept actually for Superman that's actually been explored actually recently. Actually, towards the end of the New 52 into the Rebirth era of DC Comics, they actually explored that idea, and those was actually some of the most fun stories. I think most most people who want to see Superman Returns have probably seen it at this point. But but I still don't want to just unnecessarily spoil it for people. But I
Wait.
like
You don't want to necessarily spoil it for people? You sure?
Yeah.
Is this Dave or is this his clone?
But no, I mean, I quite like Superman Returns. It's one of those be honest with you, I watched that one. I put that one in probably more than Man of Steel. It to me, it fits more with Superman. It has some really tough stuff to watch. There's a scene in there where it's just like, wow, okay, that's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
But no, I quite like Superman Returns. Eric, what about you? Did you like Superman Returns?
We've talked about it on the show.
Yeah, I know.
And I own Superman Returns. I do not own Man of Steel. Okay, so I mean, and I try to be kind of a completist when it comes to the Superman movies. I don't have the Superman and the Mole Men, which is the first actual theatrical release, full theatrical release, non-serial of Superman. I would like to have that. But then again, I'm like, well, I don't think I'm ever going to get Man of Steel, so I guess I don't have to try to be a completist anymore, So it's because I don't want that in my collection. But Superman Returns, I've got that, and I've always thought it's the biggest problem it had was that it was trying, I think, too hard to sort of do homage instead of kind of trying to go in its own direction. This is no spoiler because it happens right away. No, we do not need to see Lex Luthor doing another real estate deal. That he's obsessed with real estate deals. I mean, that's an obvious criticism right off the bat. The current interpretation of Lex Luthor, I think, is much more interesting, and they could have gone that direction and should have, with the Lex Corps and all that kind of stuff. I think that's the way to go, And the reason I even know about that is because of the animated series. I wouldn't even realize that they revamped Lex Luthor if it wasn't for the fact that I watched the animated series and loved it and thought it was great what they did with Lex Luthor. So I do like Superman Returns, though, to kind of cut to the chase of that. Man of Sam mentions, I don't like the way Henry Cavill's Clark Kent was less mild-mannered in contrast to the previous versions portrayed by Christopher Reeve and George Reeves. That is a great kind of fan debate, because I always have a thing with Batman. Oh yeah, this guy was a great Batman, but he was a terrible Bruce Wayne. Like I think that way all the time about some of these different incarnations. And I don't know, what do you think of that as far as Henry Cavill's Clark Kent? Because I think everybody likes his Superman, including me. I actually do like his Superman. But what do you think of his Clark Kent as opposed to the way George Reeves and Christopher Reeves portrayed Clark Kent?
Well, it's interesting because I have kind of a contrary view. One of my favorite portrayals of Clark Kent is I quite like what Dean Cain did in Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. I really love the pilot. The original version of the pilot that aired on television, I had actually recorded it off on VHS back in the day, and I used to have it on quite a bit because I really love his interpretation of Clark. It's weird because what Christopher Reeve did, and what a lot of the versions since then what they do is they go, okay, well, Superman's the guy, Clark Kent is the disguise. Okay. One of the things I loved about what they did with Lois and Clark that actually spun out of the John Byrne Man of Steel miniseries is they actually flip it and they just go, okay, well, Superman's the suit, but Clark Kent is the person. That's who grew up on Earth. That's who had these experiences, and the identity of Superman is something he assumes to help protect his normal life, because Clark Kent is who he is. Superman is who he becomes to help people, right? So they're two completely different philosophies and approaches. And I've always personally, as much as I love Christopher Reeve, I think Christopher Reeve will be Superman for many of us. I can't imagine anyone supplanting his interpretation of Superman for any reason. But my actual favorite interpretation of Clark Kent is actually what Dean Cain did in the pilot for Lois and Clark, because I feel like to me, that makes more sense. he grew up believing he was Clark Kent. He later discovered he is Kal-El from Krypton. So to me, it makes more sense. He would be more the farm boy from Kansas, and that would be his natural state, and they do that too. He's kind of mild mannered at times. He's kind of bumbling. He's kind of offbeat because he's had such completely different experiences, because his powers have enabled him to just experience and do things that other people couldn't imagine. And so that gives him kind of his offbeat, quirky, kind of thing where he's not just like everyone else. I mean, I've always loved that particular portrayal myself. So
I think what's interesting is if you really look at it, and I have, what Christopher Reeve did was very different than what George Reeves did. George Reeves' Clark Kent is not so much mild mannered. He's actually kind of a badass. You know what I mean? Like there was not a huge contrast between George Reeves' Clark Kent and Superman. Clark Kent is actually pretty formidable in his own right. He doesn't go around as a big goofy clod. You know what I mean? The way that Christopher Reeves Clark Kent does. So there's actually more interpretations than people sometimes, grant, because like, for instance, I would argue that the George Reeves interpretation, I mean, Clark Kent was still pretty cool. You know what I mean? Like Clark Kent actually was going out and doing things. He was this investigative reporter. He would basically start things and then Superman would finish it. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. And obviously what Christopher Reeves did, which I know a fair amount about this since I've seen some of the interviews and things that he did. He just came up with that interpretation about people really getting on the glasses. And how do people not know that this guy is Superman? Because if you look at George Reeves, Clark Kent, yeah, it's like that guy's pretty badass. You know what I mean? I mean, I wouldn't see how you would see a huge contrast between him and Superman, like especially the fact that they look alike and all that kind of stuff, except for the glasses. Well, Christopher Reeves basically said, well, I want to take it a bit further. I got to show a contrast because we're doing this on screen. They were making a more serious movie that was geared more towards, the whole family, as opposed to the George Reeves Superman, which is very much geared towards children. And he said, hey, I got to do something. So they came up with this being really goofy and awkward. And I think it works perfectly. I think I really, really enjoy Christopher Reeve's version of Superman. And I kind of see Man of Sands' point about Henry Cavill's Clark Kent being something that I don't gravitate towards as much. Like I think he's a great Superman. I don't necessarily think he's a great Clark Kent. And then there's also another kind of interpretation, by the way, from the animated series, where actually they talk about how there's actually a Death of Clark Kent episode. And they kind of get into that, where basically like Lois, I can't remember. No, it's not Lois Lane, because the only person he can talk to is Lana Lang, because she's the only one that knows the secret. So he goes to Lana Lang to talk to her about this. And her attitude actually is, well, aren't you just basically Superman? I mean, who cares? Just tell everybody you're Superman. And that's because it was an issue where like he needed to testify on something. That's why they killed Clark Kent and all that kind of stuff. And he actually had this pretty good little monologue where he's all like, I need Clark Kent. I need that ability to just blend in and be a normal guy sometimes. I need him. Although he was basically saying, I'm not him. I am Superman. You know what I mean? I am not a mild-mannered reporter, but I need him. I need him to survive. I need him psychologically. I need him to be able to function, So there's actually multiple interpretations, I think, when it comes to that Clark Kent, Superman dynamic. And Man of Sand, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is a total nerd debate. That's exactly what this show should be all about.
Well, it's like I was thinking about. There's a lot of fun things they do in Lois and Clark. Like one of my, still to this day, I love there's a scene where Lois and Jimmy have basically been captured by the villains, and then Clark, he's kind of coming behind, to discover what's going on, and he sees they're in trouble, and he knocks this door down, and he comes in and he says, "Let them go, or I'll." And she's like, "You'll do what?" And he looks at Lois and he looks at Jimmy and he's like, "Nothing." And then the next day you see he's chained up with them, and Lois is reading him the riot act, because he's like, "I don't know what you thought you were going to do." So there is that fun, quirky, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like they do that in Lois and Clark too. And that's the thing I think is really cool, is that it's sort of in between. you know,
Right.
and that's, in all honesty, I think that's what a modern interpretation of Clark should be. It should have the shades of the mild mannered and look at what Christopher Reeve was doing, but you know, maybe be kind of where, you know, he isn't always that way, because having seen, you know, if you enjoyed Smallville, you know, we know that, you know, he wasn't always that way, you know, because at times he does use Clark Kent, quote unquote, as a disguise. But then
Right.
there's other times that Superman is just a suit he's wearing because of something he's trying to accomplish or someone he's trying to help. So it is more nuanced and complex. And that's,
Well, it's nuanced and complex with the actual character, the nature of the character, because he is not a human being. He's an alien. He's a Kryptonian. He is Kal-El. That's who he actually is. Clark Kent is something that was given to him by his adopted parents, not his biological parents. And of course, you can really get into that too. You know, I know people that have been adopted and all that kind of stuff, and some people really struggle with that, you know, as far as their identity and you know who are they and all that kind of stuff. That's a real thing. I mean, that's something that people really struggle with philosophically and emotionally, you know. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of different interpretations, you know, when it comes to that and that dynamic of who he really is, you know.
It's interesting. I'm a huge Superman fan, and of course I got to work at DC. Superman is the one character we didn't get a chance to work on at all. And the we actually we made a pretty heavy pitch actually to try and get on a Superman book at one point, and Scott actually sketched up some stuff, and we put together some pitch proposals and tried to get on one of the lower tier Superman books in some capacity, because Scott and I both really wanted to work on Superman, but unfortunately it was not meant to be. So
yeah, they got some weird attitudes over there as far as how they manage their characters. We've talked about that before. So you know, it is what it is, and you obviously you know more than I, but I think a lot of people who kind of pay attention, they know DC does weird things with their characters. We've talked about that extensively. James mentions that he is on Team Colossus, because we were talking about Wolverine and we were talking about Cyclops earlier, and I always liked Colossus. I always thought actually one of my biggest disappointments with the Fox X-Men movies was they had this incredible buildup to Colossus. They had this really cool scene in X-Men 2 where we got a little taste of Colossus, and I thought that we were going to get this huge payoff in X-Men 3, and of course X-Men 3 is like the worst X-Men movie. I think it's even worse than like X-Men, you know, Origins Wolverine, which I really hate. You know what I mean?
wow.
That movie sucks as far as I'm concerned, and basically almost killed the franchise. But I was really anticipating Colossus being just literally huge. Plus, here's the obvious thing. Come on, this is the obvious thing. They had Juggernaut in X-Men 3. And you don't have Colossus and Juggernaut fight each other?
Right.
Seriously? You have them in a movie. We had a big buildup in X-Men 2 about Colossus, you know, because I love that line. It's very simple. He just comes up and he's all like, I can help you. You know what I mean? I'm not like all these other kids. I'm pretty formidable myself. You know what I mean? So if and I because it was a great tease. And then, you know, I think it was Wolverine's all like, no, kid, you know, just get him out of here, because he was basically helping all the other kids escape. But there was that great tease where he's like, I can help you, man. You know what I mean? Like, I can take these guys on, you know? And then in X-Men 3, they had Juggernaut, and we could have had this epic battle between the two of them, and no, didn't happen. He was just like kind of there, you know? I don't even recall him doing anything. He was just kind of there, you know? Oh, so disappointing.
It's unfortunate. You know, it's interesting because I know Bobby wants to chime in on Colossus here too, but my two favorite X-Men, actually one of them is Wolverine, but the other one's actually Rogue. And Rogue is one of those characters, like I felt like they got the casting right for Rogue in the movies, and there was some things I quite liked that Anna Paquin did, and the way that they introduced the character. And then by the time you get to X3, unfortunately, it's almost disgusting. Like, it's like a betrayal almost of the character. So
that was disgusting what they did to Rogue in X-Men 3, where she literally, spoiler alert, but she abandons her friends and lets them go to the final fight without her. I mean, come on. Yeah, I'll give you all the spoilers for that movie because it's nobody. If you haven't seen it, it's not worth watching. It's not worth watching. We'll spoil the hell out of that because we're saving you from having to go through that trauma of that train wreck of a movie when they had such such classic superhero films,
really good.
X-Men and X2, and then they just ruined it. But you were talking about Bobby's comment. He says Colossus and Deadpool was awesome. I did enjoy Colossus in Deadpool a lot. I thought they did it right. I thought they did a great job with that, and they had a great contrast between the two of them. We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
The dynamic between Deadpool and Colossus that really worked. You know what I mean? Because they made Colossus be like literally what he is. He's like this metal guy, and he's very stiff, and he's very like proper, and he's an X-Men, And Deadpool, of course, is such a goofball, and it worked. It worked really well, in my opinion.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm kind of hoping for is, there's been a lot of talk about the X-Men coming to the MCU. One of the things that's kind of nice about the MCU is since we have Carol Danvers, since we have the Marvel version of Captain Marvel in the MCU, then if we introduce the X-Men, maybe Rogue can get her hands on her and hold on to her just a little too long, and we actually get the proper Rogue that we all, I think those of us that are comic fans, grew up loving and reading, the one who had superhuman strength, who could fly, who was invulnerable, but who could also absorb people's powers with the Southern accent and just that sort of Southern Belle, kind of kick-ass kind of character. Because that's the thing that made Rogue so much fun, and it was kind of cool too that she was so incredibly powerful at times, because you wouldn't expect that from her when you see her. Again, that idea, the opposite, kind of idea. You wouldn't expect her to be capable of the things she was capable of, So. Right. But yeah, those were my two favorite X-Men characters growing up. Having read the comics, I loved Wolverine and I loved Rogue. So, and then Rogue had a very tortured past. I mean, she started off as a villain. That's why she had all those powers, because she nearly killed Carol Danvers when she was with the Brotherhood, I think, and they attacked the Avengers. She was going through the Avengers one by one. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's definitely pretty cool.
So awesome. So are we good to segue over into streaming wars, or do you have anything else for pop culture?
No, I think I'm good on pop culture. We can head over to streaming wars.
Okay, cool. So here in the streaming wars segment, we talk about anything interesting that we think you, our dear valued viewer, our dear valued listener, would find interesting is happening in the world of the streaming wars. Now, what do we mean by streaming wars? Well, streaming wars, we're talking about live streaming video, kind of similar to our show, but we're talking about those live streaming video services, things that you're very familiar with, like Netflix and Hulu, and maybe those things you aren't terribly familiar with, like the Peacock, or some of these other services that still are having issues that are driving me nuts, like CBS All Access. But anyhow, it's any one of these really interesting streaming services, or even some of the free ones that we talked about too, like Tubi or Pluto TV. But anyhow, in this segment, we're just going to talk about anything that we find interesting that you might want to talk about, or we think you should know about, that's happening in the world of the streaming wars. So, Eric, we kind of talked around my streaming wars topic because I was going to talk about the Henry Cavill Superman reveal. I wasn't going to look at it as the Justice Con because I didn't realize what they were calling it. But what do you have up for this episode's edition of the Streaming Wars?
I have some, I guess, good news. It sounds like I just recently saw this, so I haven't had a lot of opportunity to digest it. But we've talked about this before. We've talked about the feud that AMC was having with Universal. That Universal really kind of created another front on the streaming wars, because what happened was Universal basically decided right before the major shutdown started, they basically decided they were going to start releasing their films on VOD and in the theater simultaneously. And of course, the irony of all that was within like a week of that decision, all the theaters were shut down anyway, except for drive-ins, which we've talked about on this show, the comeback of the drive-ins. There are still theaters of it out there that are open. But what's interesting about all that is, for instance, Trolls World Tour was the one that really started this whole situation going, because a lot of theaters wanted it, and then Universal was saying you're not going to get it. It turned out not to matter because most of those theaters were closed, but the drive-ins still got Trolls World Tour, and that's not happening with a lot of these other movies that are going straight to streaming. Hamilton's a good example of that. Hamilton was supposed to have a theatrical run. They just threw it on Disney Plus, and those few theaters that are open, those drive-ins, they didn't get a chance to show it, which I think is wrong. I think it would have been good if they had done that. So it says what AMC and Universal's historic streaming deal really means for moviegoers. So this just happened very recently. It says, in a summer when the global pandemic has plagued the movie industry with a rash of theater closures, turning sound stages into ghost towns and infecting the global filmmaking and distribution ecosystem with job losses, AMC and Universal have agreed to roll up the window. That is to say, America's largest theater chain and one of Hollywood's 5 major studios have agreed to put aside their well-publicized differences to strike a historic deal permitting Universal's movie releases to stream on paid video on demand platforms a mere 17 days after they are shown in theaters. So this, I think, is actually pretty good news as far as going forward, that basically, because there's been a lot of back and forth between AMC and Universal, there was a point where basically AMC was saying, hey, you're going to regret this, Universal, when we open back up, because we're not going to even show your movies anymore. So now what they've done basically is condense the window before, there was a longer period of time before you could, release something on VOD, if you were going to have a theatrical release as well. So now they've kind of closed that window. I think going forward, it's probably likely that Universal is still going to release a lot of stuff simultaneously, as far as the pandemic. But this is a way forward, as theaters start to open up again. And I don't know if you had seen this, Dave, this story here.
I hadn't seen it. I personally also think it's good news. I like the idea if we can kind of shorten that window, because there are certain films and whatever that for whatever reason I don't really sometimes get a chance to get out and see them in the theaters. I mean, none of us are getting a chance to get out and see much of anything in the theater right now because of what's going on, obviously. But beyond that, I'm talking in more normal conditions as opposed to the new normal conditions. I sometimes, unfortunately, will miss things that I do want to see. So I think that's cool that they're doing that. There had been similar stories like this before. We had discussed this, that there had been some announcements that I think it was AMC and Universal that I think it might have been these same two, that there was some kind of thing where AMC was going to have a movie at home thing that they were going to do. And we had discussed, it's like, well, I wonder how that's going to work. So I wonder if this is kind of an outgrowth of that, that's that same idea kind of cycling back in a slightly different form as well.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything more about that, because we did talk about that it seemed like there was some sort of plan, which you think they would be totally all over it right now. But another part of that might be because they think the market's just so saturated at this point with all the different players that we have in the streaming wars now, that maybe they're even putting that on the back burner, and they're just concentrating on, hey, when can we actually open again? What movies are actually going to be available when we open again? Because those are big questions. We just talked about New Mutants earlier, and the plan is for New Mutants to come out very soon, September 1st, I think. So is that really going to happen? I don't know. The way things look, I don't know. I'm guessing, this is pure speculation, but I'm guessing it's possible that if they released it in the drive-in circuit, they might be able to still, meet that contractual obligation they had to release it in theaters. I don't know, because obviously AMC is one of the biggest players, and they've been completely shut down. They don't have any drive-ins. So I'm not sure exactly how that affects all those different things. But I think in terms of when you look at what the actual new normal is going to be versus, how things are going right now in the middle of a sort of crisis situation, this is a better way forward. As you mentioned, I've done the same thing where I've actually missed movies during their theatrical run, and then you do have to wait quite a while for them to come out on any kind of streaming service or VOD or anything like that. This article did mention this deal apparently is not going to actually apply to Peacock, though, which is kind of interesting. So it says, basically they're going to have releases like, for instance, Minions: The Rise of Gru is going to be coming out July 2nd, 2021. That's supposedly when it's coming out. Says fans will have the option of watching the animated sequel in theaters or waiting almost 3 weeks to either rent it or buy it. This film will not be available on NBC Universal's Peacock. So it's kind of interesting. So that's part of the deal as well. So you'll have those options where you can do these rental services, where you have these options where you can buy the movie. But interestingly enough, they won't be showing, sounds like they won't be showing, Trolls World Tour on Peacock anytime soon, which is kind of interesting because, it's kind of weird because, you would think they'd be trying to get some really kind of, big content, big announcements for Peacock. But right now, it doesn't really look like that's the case.
Yeah, it's interesting how, I guess it's just going to be interesting to see how this landscape kind of continues to unfold because, the VOD, the video at home, when you look at, of course, the rise of the streaming services, is obviously we're talking about here in the streaming wars. It's an avenue they need to look at, and they do need to find ways to shorten that window, from when something leaves theaters versus is available in home. And, there's always two that talk about, day and date, and have it available to purchase and watch at home, but then also, go out and see it at the theater as well. There's been obviously talk off and on with different people and different groups wanting to try and somehow find a way to make that work. So I do think the window will continue to shrink over time, and it'll get to the point where maybe it's a week or even a couple days after something is potentially in theaters. But it does kind of require kind of like this, as long as they want to keep the theaters as an important, valuable, partner, of the movie going experience. They need to keep in mind how best they can, help out, them as customers, as well as those of us, just in the general viewing public who want to watch something, also as customers. But the needs between those two different groups could not be more different. So it'd be interesting to see how this kind of unfolds, over time.
Right. Yeah. And I'm also interested to see more about what they're going to do with theaters that are open, particularly with the drive-ins and things like that, to go forward and see how they're going to try to accommodate them as well. Because we've seen numerous instances where, like I use the example of Hamilton. There's other examples as well, where you have these films that they decided not to release theatrically at all and instead release on a streaming platform. In this case, we're talking about Disney Plus. And so they kind of left, their theater partners completely out in the cold, not even accommodating the ones that are still open that would love to have some new content, I'm sure. They're staying open with legacy content. They're staying open with things like Empire Strikes Back and Ghostbusters and stuff like that. But, they, of course, they've got to be hurting for new content. So, it's kind of interesting to see how that dynamic is working as well, because I've made the case before that Universal seemed to be playing a little bit nicer with those theaters that are still open, whereas some of the other studios like Disney, I believe Warner Brothers did something similar with a movie that they had. Oh, Scoob. They did it with Scoob. Warner Brothers did it with Scoob, where they went straight to VOD and completely kept the drive-ins out of the loop. So I'll be interested to see how that's going to go forward too.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I'm like I said, I think that they need to find a way to shorten that window, and make this content available, to people who want to see it a little bit more quickly. And then it's number two. I keep bringing up New Mutants, like contractually or whatever. It's just kind of weird, all the hurdles they're having to go through with that film in order to just make it available so people can see it, whether you pay to watch it VOD or you see it on like a streaming service or whatever. And the fact that they were able to get 200,000 views, on their video kind of goes to prove that there is interest in this film and people want to see it. Yeah, it's interesting too, because that's the last of the Fox X-Men movies, in a sense. That's the last of their, what they were doing. That's the last piece of what, quote unquote, will be their legacy. And that those films do have a legacy. So, we'll see. We'll see as time goes on how they're going to have to adjust to this changing landscape, not just what's going on with the pandemic, but beyond that, the fact that people's viewing habits and stuff is changing.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, obviously, that's just the way that the business is right now. It's the only constant is change.
Very cool. So, and first, like I said earlier, I don't really have anything for Streaming Wars this episode. Eric, do you have anything else, or?
No, that's pretty much all I've got for Streaming Wars.
Okay, cool. So, I guess if you want, we could go ahead and segue over into our last topic, which would be our retro review. Do you want me to pull up the Feature 2 graphic, or do you have something that maybe you might have found, or?
Got that.
Well, there you go. Very cool. That'll work great. Awesome. Okay. So I'll just set this up real quick, and then we'll start talking about Highlander. So here in our retro review, we're going to be talking about the film Highlander. Now, this is also a retrospective of sense, or how are we calling it before, Eric? I know we were calling it something. You had come up with you coined an interesting phrase, Rogues Retrospective. I'm glad you put that graphic up where I could see it. Thanks. Now I feel like a real putz. Thanks for doing that. So here we're going to be talking about, let's see here. I was going to pull up the IMDb review real quick. Not the review, but the summary. So we are talking about, here on the Rogues Retrospective, we're talking about Highlander. This is Highlander is from 1986, so the film originally came out. I'm going to read the summary here on IMDb, kind of hit some high points, and then we'll get into talking about it. So the summary is, an immortal Scottish swordsman must confront the last of his immortal opponents, a murderously brutal barbarian who lusts for the fabled prize. And they put prize in parentheses. What's interesting is, before I even scroll down, I can tell you this film was directed by Russell Mulcahy. This, for me, is one of Russell Mulcahy's best films, and I'd say one of his other best films is actually The Shadow. So this film stars Christopher Lambert, Roxanne Hart, Clancy Brown, Sean Connery, and it's just got a really, really great cast. This was written by Gregory Wyden and Peter Bellwood and Larry Ferguson. So in order to do a Rogues retrospective, we need to first start off by talking about how we first heard about the film or first learned about the film, and talk about our impressions, when we first saw it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we feel about the film today. That's how you make it a retrospective. You talk about it then, and then you talk about it today within a contemporary or more modern context. So, Eric, do you want to go first, and I'll go after you? Let's first talk about how we first heard about or first originally saw Highlander.
Well, it's kind of weird for me, so I'll go first because I don't have a ton to say, because here's the situation for me. Like many movies that were made in the 80s, especially if they were, rated R or anything like that, I didn't see them in the theater. I was not allowed to watch rated R movies when I was a kid. So that was not something that was permitted. And so often when it came to rated R movies, I would hear about it from my brother. My brother would get to go see it, and then he would hear him describe it. So I actually heard this movie described like 100 times, I think, by my brother, because he loved it. So I had this whole image in my head of how the movie was supposed to be, or what it was, that was, not based on any actual reality, but just based on my brother's description of what he saw. Now, it's important to remember, Dave and I were kind of talking about this off the air. This movie basically is a cult classic. It was not successful when it came out. It was basically a bomb. It did not make its budget back. So it's kind of interesting the life that it took later. But my brother was always like that. Like, for instance, I mentioned he loved Flash Gordon. He saw that in the theater. I didn't get to see that in the theater. I saw that one on cable. I do remember that. I remember I saw Flash Gordon on cable at a neighbor's house. With Highlander, I'm not sure exactly where I actually ended up seeing it. I don't have an actual memory of where the first time it was that I saw it. I don't believe it was on TV. I don't know if it's when I just went ahead and bought it or if one of my friends had it and showed it to me. I really don't remember. I just remember that growing up, my brother always used to talk about it. So I wanted to see it. I know that I would have sought it out as I got older and was able to watch rated R movies or able to buy movies myself. And at some point I did. I mean, this is another one that I actually own. And this is actually, the steel case edition, one of the special steel case editions. And, I've had it for a long time, but I have to tell you, I do not remember the first time I actually saw this film.
Well, that's interesting. So, for me, it's the way that I first learned about Highlander was just actually, I was flipping channels and it just was on. It was on, I think it was on channel 24. As like an afternoon, like weekend type movie type thing. I didn't actually see it on VHS. It was a TV, cut down TV dubbed, not dubbed, TV censored, I guess the best way to put it, version, because they took out some of the language and whatever. And I didn't even know what it was. I came in actually when he was fighting. He was fighting the guy in the parking garage, and then the wrestling match with the Fabulous Thunderbirds is going on at the same time. And then I had a friend who unfortunately he just passed away earlier this year. His name was Edwin. He was a big wrestling fan, and whenever we would play action figures and stuff, he would always say Boba Fett was Jerry the King Lawler, which always used to disturb me. And he would never actually let his Boba Fett just be Boba Fett. For some reason, Jerry the King Lawler was always involved in all these adventures, which never made any sense to me because I wasn't a big wrestling fan like he was. But I remembered I was flipping channels and Highlander was just on, and I was like, why is this guy? They're fighting with swords in the subway, and there's a wrestling match going on. What is happening here? I didn't understand what I was watching, and that's what initially pulled me in. And then as the film went on, you segue to Scotland, and you get the introduction, obviously, of Sean Connery's character, and it just continues to build, and then you got all the stuff with the Kurgan, and it just was a very interesting film, and it was unlike anything I had ever seen before. The mix of, the sword. There's not really sorcery in this per se, but the way in which they somehow survive feels like sorcery, and then the idea of taking, these immortal swordsmen and moving their eternal, or long-lasting battle and then moving it to, at that time, which was, the modern age. Because it's important to remember, I think for a lot of people, it's hard to understand. Well, not hard to understand, but it may seem weird, but for a lot of us growing up in the 80s, I mean, that it wasn't a retro film. It wasn't like something taking place in the past. It was something that felt like it was happening or had just happened, because obviously we were living through those times. But yeah, I just remember it was just on television. I remember just watching it. I think I'd heard people talk about Highlander, and I'd heard some of the songs, the Queen songs. Which is hard not to sing the theme song from Highlander. I want to do that. We were doing that actually before he came on air. I was actually singing it. And Eric's like, you can't do that. You're going to get us in trouble. That's how I want to start the show. It's going to sing a theme song from Highlander for you all, but I was told I can't do it. But anyhow, that's how I discovered it. I was just flipping channels and it was just on, and I was just immediately struck by it and mesmerized by it. And from that moment on, eventually I bought it on VHS, and I bought it in other, variations. And, now I own it on, I think I own it on DVD. I don't own it on Blu-ray. But it's just one of those films that I've always just been enamored with and thought was really cool. So that's how I first found out about Highlander. No one had told me about it. I didn't know much about it. Like I said, I heard some of the Queen songs. But I just was flipping the channels, and it was just on one day, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. I was kind of shocked at the fact that I kind of heard people talk about it, but I hadn't heard people talk more favorably about it. And it's not like they talked negatively about it, but it just wasn't a very hot topic amongst my group of friends, how awesome Highlander was, because it is, and in my opinion, as we get to the current retrospective, how I feel that it still is. So that was how I first heard about or first discovered Highlander, was just flipping channels, which again, for some people may seem weird, some of the more modern, viewers actually watching this, skipping channels might seem a little strange to them. So, but it's a very common occurrence back in the day. Wow, I feel old. Back in the day. I just used back in the day. All right. So anyhow, so now that we've talked about how we first learned about the film and our initial impressions, we want to talk about how we feel about the film today. And please, those of you in the Rogues Gallery, please chime in how you feel about Highlander, whether first experience watching it or obviously how you feel about it today, because we very much want to hear your opinions as well. So we want to talk about how you feel about the film today, having recently just watched Highlander. We want you first, Eric. Let's go ahead and go with you first again. Tell me, how do you feel about Highlander today? And of course, you watched The Order, obviously, for this episode. I, of course, apparently dream watched part of The Order, but didn't actually watch any of it.
It's the old guard. Remember, we had that confusion earlier.
Yeah,
the Order.
So
It's the old guard.
That's part of the problem with this naming of this film. I'm really confused about this movie. Yes, The Old Guard. So, because you were kind of linking it up a little bit with how it's similar to Highlander, but also fails compared to Highlander 2. So, so tell me, how do you feel about Highlander today?
It's really interesting. As I mentioned, this film was not a box office success, and I have to say, I don't know why. I really don't know why. I mean, I think this movie is shot amazingly. I mean, amazingly. Some of the techniques used in filming this uh, this movie are just amazingly well shot. I just was mesmerized by that. It's definitely 100% cinematic. And I really, really enjoyed it. And the other thing about this, we've talked about this with a lot of new media, a lot of this new stuff that comes out. And a lot of this stuff just takes so long for anything to actually happen. And as you mentioned, Dave, the way that this opens up, at the wrestling match, and then basically you have this fight in the parking garage. I mean, that's right off the bat. That's immediately. I mean, the very first thing you have is this big fight. And then you're immediately after that, you're back in Scotland, kind of getting the backstory of the main character to see what his life was like before he realized who and what he really was. And so it's really, I think, really well put together. The way they, a lot of movies when they're too like flashback intensive, it derails things. Like you kind of don't understand, where am I? Is this a flashback movie, or is this something that's supposed to be relevant to what's happening right now? Or, Highlander, I think, does a really good job of going back and forth and actually making that work. Because basically the flashbacks help you to understand what is actually going on now. And that's what flashbacks should do. Flashbacks should basically help you understand what the story now, why this is all relevant. Why does the Highlander, why is he doing this? What are these immortals? What are the rules? I mentioned that earlier. That was one of my problems with the Old Guard, was I wasn't quite understanding what the rules were for their version of immortals. Or why they were doing what they were doing. In this one, it's made very clear, in a pretty early part of the movie. And I also think it's really interesting that the biggest star in this movie, which is, I think there's no denying it is Sean Connery. And the way that he is used is really, really interesting as well. You know, like the fact that he was such a huge star at that time, but he really takes a back seat in this movie, you know, and taking sort of that mentor role. I guess it's very Alec Guinness when you think about it. It's very Alec Guinness the way that he's in this movie.
Yeah, and this film, one of the things that's really fun about revisiting this film in a modern context is some of the sort of more, I think, for some of us, elements that might kind of strike you as kind of odd. For example, one of the things I think of is there's a, you know, we were talking about, you know, these kind of characters, these anti-hero type characters. And we actually have a street level vigilante, a Punisher-esque kind of character that's just kind of stuck in this movie, which is kind of strange. For some people, I imagine that would seem sort of weird. But in the 80s, we had Bernard Goetz, who was the subway, you know, vigilante. And, you know, there was all these different vigilante groups that were emerging, you know, kind of in New York at the time. And that, of course, inspired things like, of course, the novel Vigilante, which also later inspired Death Wish, which is the series of the Charles Bronson movies. That the first Death Wish film, I still think, is a really great film, in my opinion. And it's interesting that they, because of the time, I don't know if they meant for it to be relevant or just reflective of what was happening, that we even have a character that's stuck in the film. That's one of the things that for modern, you know, viewers who visit this, it might seem a little strange, you know, that you have that kind of stuck in the film. But, you know, there's also all these really awesome kind of timeless elements of the film too, you know, like all the great Queen music that really elevate the film, because that's one of the great things about music. Great music can make something better than what it really is, and when it's already really good, you know what I mean, it just heightens it. It makes it even better. Like, you know, Who Wants to Live Forever, you know, played in the scene in which they play it is so heartbreaking, and it really drives that idea home. The idea that maybe being immortal isn't all it's cracked up to be. You know, who does want to live forever? You know, this film has so many great things about it, and again, maybe it's because I saw it back in the day, but when I watch it now, I just look at just great storytelling, great characters, great action, really some awesome, you know, just cinematography at times too. You know, the way they shot some of the scenes, whether you want to talk about the sword battles, you know, like, for example, even the underground garage, or even some of the really fun helicopter sweeping shots they do when they're in Scotland, and you see them training.
When they're training, Sean Connery and oh gosh, I just had a brain fart on the other actor's name.
Christopher Lambert.
So when the two of them are training and they have that aerial shot of them, it's majestic. It's amazing. That shot is absolutely perfection. Really well done.
And I do want to point out some of the comments here. Just Bobby Chambers is over here, and he mentions that he says one of the best villains ever. He was so ruthless, and he says Clancy Brown has a perfect bad guy face. LOL. Yep. Yeah. Clancy Brown is a great villain in everything he's in, but he's not just a great villain. He's just a great actor as the drill sergeant in Starship Troopers, you know, as the voice of Lex Luthor in Superman, the animated series, and obviously as the Kurgan in Highlander. He is such a really, really great villain. And one of the cool things about his villain is at times kind of charming. You know, while he is ruthless and despicable, there's that scene where he's in the church because, of course, they can't fight on hallowed ground. And then I think isn't that the Clash he quotes when he says, it's better to burn out than fade away. Maybe it's not the Clash. I've got that wrong. It's someone else. Who is that? That comes from like a classic 80s.
That is an awesome line, and the way it's delivered is awesome.
Yeah.
He's incredibly over the top in this. I mean, he is totally over the top in the best way possible. He is just completely over the top. You know, that same scene, he's apologizing to the priest and he licks his hand and all that kind of stuff. I mean, he was just going places that it was like, you wonder if that was even in the script, or if he was just so into the character that he was just doing this crazy shit. You know what I mean? Because he really does. He does an excellent job of just being this totally over the top villain. That's just really, really interesting. Really, really interesting.
Wow, I think that was actually Neil Young who said that. Anyhow, I had that totally wrong. But no, that's there's just so, and that's the thing. It's like his Kurgan, his villain, is just so much fun to watch. Whether he's being totally evil and brutal, or he's being sort of in his own way, sort of, while enigmatic and hard to pin down, at the same point, oddly at times kind of charming and interesting and kind of fun, just fun to watch. It goes back to those great villain performances I keep talking about when I talk about, Max von Sydow's being the Merciless, or I talk about how much I love Frank Langella, Skeletor, or there's just sometimes there's these just really great actors, and they inhabit these roles and they create a truly memorable and interesting movie villain. And we have that with Clancy Brown and the Kurgan. And it's also kind of fun too. They have that scene where he's like assembling his sword, and it's almost like he's like you see like later like a Rambo movie where they're assembling like, the different weapons or whatever. You see like in a James Bond movie where they put something together and it turns it into a gun or whatever. And he's got all these random pieces, and when he gets done, he's got this giant, huge, like, barbarian sword. There's just so much fun. And that's the thing. That's the other thing about Highlander. It's fun. There's so much fun stuff in Highlander. It sucks you into the story. You have the feels. You go along for the journey. You have all the fun stuff that happens with the training, and it's got the training montage. It's such a great film. It's just such a great film. And I feel like the film is still great today. And still totally worth watching. If you have not seen Highlander, if you have not revisited Highlander recently, I cannot recommend Highlander enough. And this film is so strong and has so many great ideas. And you look at the legacy, and you mentioned earlier, Eric, the franchise that comes from Highlander. You have the television series, of course, you've got the animated series they did. We have all the different movies, regardless of how you feel about Highlander 2. There's all this just amazing stuff that kind of spun out of Highlander. And it's ironic because it was a box office flop when it originally came out. And it continues to endure with certain fans. People still, talk about it, very highly. I know there's been talk about trying to reboot Highlander. This is one of those films, I wonder, when you look at the performances, whether you want to talk about Sean Connery, whether you want to talk about Christopher Lambert, whether you want to talk about, Clancy Brown, it's just, I wonder, can you do it? I think the television series says maybe you can find a way to reintroduce Highlander if you do it in the right way, because the television series showed that it could live beyond just the film, in my opinion. But it's one of those things, you got to be careful. But this is such a great film. I can't recommend Highlander enough, especially if you found yourself kind of bored with some of the current stuff that's been coming out. Give Highlander a shot. I think you would quite enjoy it. Would you agree with me, Eric?
Yeah. And Bobby Chambers says, I agree, Dave. I need to go watch this again right after the show. There you go, Bobby. That's exactly the kind of reaction that we want when we try to recommend something to someone. Go out and watch it. Go out and watch it right now after you're done watching us. It's a really interesting movie. It really is. It's a lot of fun, but it's also got a lot of sort of high concept stuff that I really enjoyed. One of the things I thought was interesting. One of the things that took me out of the old guard, and this isn't really like a spoiler, but early in that movie, they go in to like infiltrate this like prison camp. That's part of the premise, is they're infiltrating this prison camp. And they come in during the day. They're completely armed up. They're carrying swords, which I thought was really goofy. Okay, the way that they did it. They actually have swords, with their tack gear and everything like that. And they're just walking through the countryside, and like people are actually seeing them as they're walking by, and they're actually like, hey, peace, what's up, that kind of a thing. And I contrast that to what they did in this, where you mentioned the scene with the Kurgan, where he actually is assembling the sword. The idea being, hey, you can't just walk around the city carrying a sword. You know what I mean? So he's got it like he's converted so that it fits better in the modern age. Likewise, the McLeod, the other character, he wears a trench coat and he conceals his sword when he's out and about and things like that, because if you run around with a sword in New York, you're going to cause attention. And it's like little things like that help me believe the world a little bit more. You know what I mean? As opposed to, we're going to just take a stroll through the African countryside in broad daylight with all of our weapons and these stupid swords that make you look like you're like what? You know what I mean? It just makes you look like a goofball, because nobody does that. So those kind of like little touches, they help me believe in this fantastical world much more than, the old guard did.
And, and one of those things too, I can't talk enough about. I'm trying so hard not to sing some of these great songs. So much great music comes out of this movie too. It's just, that's the thing. This movie is that total package. It's the total package. It's got it all. So it's so weird that that the film, when it hit theaters, didn't somehow click and resonate with people. I wonder if it just came out during that period where there's so much, great stuff that came out at movie theaters that it just kind of got overlooked, in the midst of all of it.
I could see some people maybe thinking it was a little bit like they were kind of knocking off Star Wars a little bit or something like that. I could kind of see that, or maybe people thought that. I don't know, but because it is a very epic movie. And it was obviously not done on the cheap. I mean, you can tell that there was some budget in this. I mean, Sean Connery's in it, so yeah. It wasn't made. I mean, they did all sorts of location shooting. It's very obvious. I mean, they spent some bucks on this. I mean, the ending fight. I mean, this is all before CGI, and I mean, they did a lot in the climax of the film. A lot of effects before CGI existed. So it's really interesting, and I would like to know kind of what people's take is on why it wasn't a success at the time. It certainly has gained a big following afterwards, and obviously that you can go beyond that, because it did create a franchise. Highlander had many sequels, and of course the television series, which I know a lot of people liked. As we mentioned, it even had a cartoon. I mean, they had so many different spin-offs of Highlander, and realized that there was a lot more potential for the property than I think they thought at first. Because at first, this is not a movie that really sets up a sequel. I mean, you could have done something with that, but they never have, by the way. They've never actually completed the story, as it's told in this. We never actually get to see him using, the gift. You know what I mean? We never really get to see him do that. I don't think there's been any incarnation of Highlander that's ever even gone there. If you were to reboot it, that's one place that you might try. But I think the problem is everybody likes the central premise of the immortals fighting for the prize. That's kind of what everybody likes. So they always kind of had to figure out ways to bring that back, even though that's already over. It's over in the first movie. So
yeah, this is that's true. But I always took the prize just to mean that he was mortal, and that's kind of what they.
Let's not totally spoil it, but that's not the prize. Yeah. I actually forgot what the prize was, and watching it again, that's not what the prize is. And you totally could do something with the prize and what changes actually occurred with him, but they never have. As far as I know, none of these other sequels, prequels, TV shows, none of them have really gone there. They've all just kind of tried to twist the central premise, because obviously this is a complete story. This movie is a complete story, and there is some place you could go, but they've never gone there. They always want to go back to what, sort of the central premise of the movie, which is the immortals fighting each other for the prize. You know what I mean? It's like, that's the hook. That's what everybody wants to see. But they've never gone in the other direction to show us what's it supposed to be like afterwards. Just never happened.
Cool. Well, do we think that's good? Are we ready to go to the outro?
Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. I mean, I definitely recommend it. It was really fun to watch, and even though like I did not hate the old guard by any means, I thought that this movie was way better. I think they did. I think that you go to the original, they always do it better. They always do it best.
Well, and it's like for me, I consider this film to be a classic. I mean, it's got, and it has so many great elements, and it's got such a great cast. And like I said, the music that comes out of this is really great too. And it's interesting because I remember when I went and saw John, what was the name of the Queen biopic that they did? Shoot, I'm blanking on it. I thought the way that they used "Who Wants to Live Forever" was so well placed that even in that film. And that's the thing that's really cool, is that it's just there again. There's just, this film has so many great elements, and it's just really cool. Like I said, to me, it's a classic. Especially those that are into genre films, that love science fiction, sword and sorcery, those kind of things. Like this film to me is very, very much a classic. So and a must see if you haven't seen it.
Totally agree.
Awesome, very cool. All right, cool. All right, well, if that's good, I guess we'll go ahead and we'll segue over into the outro.
Sounds
It's weird because I still set those things up as if we're recording the audio show, but in reality, we don't really do the audio show anymore. Right? I still set them up that way. I was like, well, let's do this portion so I can cut this part out and then put that in and drop in a sound effect or something. So, anyhow,
gotcha.
Right. All right, so we want to thank you for watching this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. Again, my name is Dave Beatty. I've been one of your hosts. You can learn more about me, see some of my artwork, and as of right now, find a link actually to Kirby Tees at davebeatty.com. That's www.davebeaty.com. There's all kinds of fun sketches. There's a couple of art prints. But more importantly, there's a link to Kirby Tees. And Eric was nice enough to put that up. KirbyTees.com. You can go over there. You can get your really great Retro Rogues t-shirt. Help support the show. But in addition to that, you can also even order your own custom shirt. So definitely check out what's going on over there at Kirby Tees. And I want to thank Mr. Eric Alexander, my co-host, for coming on and doing the great job that he always does. Obviously holding the show up when I'm kind of falling short or apparently passing out and falling asleep. So thanks, Eric, for always being there to keep everything running. And please tell the folks hopefully watching or listening home where they can learn more about you on the interwebs.
Well, I am most active on Twitter. So you can actually find me over at BassGod14. That's BASSGOD14. Actually, let me take this banner down so you can actually see that. So yes, it's at BassGod14, BASSGOD14. That's on Twitter. That's also the official Twitch, and that's also the official YouTube. So you can reach me on any of those. And please do your comments and let me know what you think. And always, share that content as much as you possibly can. I really appreciate it. I don't have a comment for the end, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to give myself the last word this time. But I do appreciate the comments that came out earlier. And we'll be back next week. We're going to be talking about Star Trek. We're actually going to be talking about the animated series and also the Star Trek Next Generation episode, Lower Decks. We actually have the whole show planned for next week. So please tune in for that. And everybody have a good night.